following program is from NET, the National Educational Television Network.
It's like what you're doing, I could take. I could take it as an individual. But I can't see my brothers who don't know you, and I know you. They don't know you, and I see them running in the street in your traps. I see them forced to steal, not knowing. I see you knowing you're forcing them to steal and won't do nothing about it. And I see you making them criminals and then punishing them for being criminals. I see you making them poor. I see you making them poor, unable to live. And yet still, you punish them for stealing. You won't give them jobs, and they're human beings and blood running in their veins, but you can't find ways for them to ensure that blood to keep on running. They got to steal. They got to, because they don't know, they don't have the education. They've been robbed completely, underfed, underemployed, underenjoyed, under everything. Under everything.
Turn on all the vocals. Yeah. One time for your mind, I am not flavor. My man DJ Scratch in the house. Like this. Check it.
The street battle grows hotter, so the eye plays the role of a martyr, touching every land on earth like the Harlem Globetrotter, with a message of praise, telling brothers to raise their hands and take a stand, because we all understand you have to make the cake with grease so that the bladder release, and make enough so that we all get a piece. A slice for Mama Do, a slice for Papa Do. I come from uptown, and kid, that's how we do. I only speak for I can't speak for your crew. So why would I waste my time to even stress you? I keep my mind on bill, and plus increasing the skills. Constant thoughts on other matters, can't hear the idle chatters about. So I escape and take the funk route out. History's taught me what it's all about. My destiny is fulfilled when I'm over and out, but I'll leave a part of me to cover all my accounts, and I'm
You
out.
always wanna be in the spotlight, right? Center of attention. I also like to mention, I rocks the spot. It's like that cause we keep it
Check
high.
it out, yo. See, I prefer the player's approach, so bust it. Joints bumping lovely, skins is thick like custard, plus the weapons to keep it stepping, while I perfects the art of microphone checking. Your flow slick for a second, but now it's Robbo's dick you're sweating. And at my shows, you seem threatened while you stressing attempts to quench the strength of the swift microphonist. Your bitch attention is to bonus, monotonous, cruising on this and I got rhythm, goddamn. Confuse the funk music, rock the jam. Pack the stand, stack the grands, and mac the female fans at the local theater. The vocal creator / I shall blast because you can't fuck with me. I guess it's just the way your luck will be. Frontin' much nerve with a rep that you can't preserve. Step to Iron 95, you getting served. I'm at the center of
You always
attention.
wanna be in the spotlight, right? Center of attention. I also like to mention, I rocks the spot. It's like that cause we keeping it hot.
Yo, does it truly pay to be the center of attention? The main attraction, getting all the action. People stopping the eye with question after question. I spit a few replies and keep to myself, and never been the weapon carrying type, but I'll incite a riot, organized and never quiet. Don't try it. This in the eye, there's no use. I bounce like a K-Shaw tape and get loose. Gripping the mic, spitting words I write on the pad or the paper. This particular caper got enough ups and downs. Industry clowns, jealous niggas trying to keep counting my figures. But yo, I'm a spiritual millionaire dropping bombs like King David when he wrote the psalm. So what you need to do is listen up, remain calm, not riding the wave. Refuse to be a slave cause I'm the
You always
center.
wanna be in the spotlight, right? Center of attention. I also like to mention, I rocks the spot. It's like that cause we keeping it hot. True. Yo, you always wanna be in the spotlight, right? Center of attention. I also like to mention, I rocks the spot. It's like that cause we keeping it hot. True that, true that, true that.
Soul brother, Pete Rock once again, smashing it all the time. Check it out. Yeah, Polo, the center of attention. Mechanicians use the center of attention. Terrence I be the center of attention. My man Tito, the center of attention. Money Taz use the center of attention. And Ram Banger use the center of attention. Lou Busy use the center of attention. Pete Red, the center of attention. Ooh, you know the center of attention. You be War G, the center of attention. You be G.O.B, the center of attention. My man Rock-a-Lot, the center of attention. Dave Ice is the center of attention. My brother Heavy D, use the center of attention. All the boroughs be the center of attention. Pete Rock, use the center of attention. Let's bounce.
Good evening, I'm Paul Newz. That young man was one of the militant leaders of the newly emerging poor, the urban, often Negro poor. He was holding forth on behalf of the poor in a forum given him by the Poverty Program, which also gives him his salary. He was telling his immediate audience, the Los Angeles Poverty Board, that despite its and the federal government's efforts, poverty was still widespread, abject, and intolerable. The young man's crusade is part of something much larger than Los Angeles or the Poverty Program. It's part of a kind of ferment which has lately become manifest in cities across the country. Some of its roots are in the young war on poverty. Some are in the older civil rights movement. Ferment does not always seek precise channels toward precise goals. Sometimes it just boils. Its apostles come from a variety of backgrounds, and they bring a variety of motivations. Some, utterly sincere, simply know many grievances and are reaching for redress. They want better jobs and homes and schools, and most of all, they want a stake and a voice in the community and its institutions. Others include opportunists and charlatans seeking power for its own sake, and extremists pretending to seek reform, but really seeking to promote unrest as a means towards revolution. The ferment takes many forms: speeches, marches, sit-ins, boycotts, political campaigns. But the key word common to all the militant leaders and groups is organization. Sometimes the purpose is limited: the improvement of a schoolyard, more equitable treatment in a clinic, more frequent garbage collections. Sometimes it's larger and more vague: the eradication of slums. Among the multitude of groups is the Chicago organization that brought Dr. Martin Luther King to the North. It's called the Union to End Slums. Its staff people have been moving from door to door through the slums, recruiting poor people, training them as volunteers, and then sending them back to bring in more people. The crusade has not been dramatically successful. To one block party, 400 people were individually invited. Only 8 showed up. But the indoctrination began.
So you knock on the door the first time, and the man opens the door and says, "Who are you?" And you say, "Well, I'm Mrs. Johnson. I live up the block there."
It has not been dramatically successful. To one block party, 400 people were individually invited. Only 8 showed up. But the indoctrination began.
So you knock on the door the first time, and the man opens the door and says, "Who are you?" And you say, "Well, I'm Mrs. Johnson. I live up the block there." And you're going to stand there and wait for a while, because he's going to try to figure out what you're doing. Maybe your son hit his son, and you want to talk about that. And you say, "Well, no, we got problems in our community we got to get together about." Now, he may think you're a fool that first time, because it's going to be awfully strange. First time, probably in 15 or 20 years, someone from the community is coming knocked on his door saying that they want to help him and they want him to help them. But don't don't stop there. What you're going to have to do, you might have to go back again. See, Jimmy and Susie and I are used to that now. We just go banging on doors anyway. They slam the door, tell us don't come back. So what we decided to do then, so that you can understand who's working for Dr. King and who's not, we got these armbands for you. So what we got to do is, like Dr. King said the other day, be dissatisfied. That's right. You got to decide that this ain't the best you can do. Go on and try to make something more out of life. And try to get everybody in East Garfield Park, because this is a pretty big community, but try to get everybody in East Garfield Park together and into this union structure so that we can, one thing, just end slums. And that'll probably be done by doing a number of separate things, like cutting the color tax, making sure that if you have a 5-room apartment, that you're not paying any more than $75 for it. If you're paying $100, you're paying too much. Also, in terms of really getting Negroes some economic security in the community, going to try to make sure that the minimum wage is raised to at least $2, probably better, so that every job that anybody gets, he's guaranteed of making enough money to live.
And let me see, what else? We're going to try to get these schools in shape, make sure that you don't have overcrowdedness. Because whenever you have an overcrowded school, that means your child isn't learning very much, because teachers just can't teach all of them. So they teach one here and one there. Sometimes, you know, if you get sick, you don't get taught because you haven't been to school when it was your turn. And we can do the same thing with the welfare department. See, and that's what we're starting to do now with the welfare unions. Getting all the welfare people together so that they can first understand what their rights are. Right? And then to act in unison so that they can have power. Because right now, the caseworker has all the power. The Negro community is powerless. See, we don't have power to do anything. Like you said, we got to beg the welfare department. We got to beg the precinct captains. We got to beg just about anybody who we want something from. Because we don't have power to stand up and say, this is what we need, now we're going to get it. But with the union, what we're going to be able to do is establish a power base.
The new militants are using some old techniques familiar in the civil rights movement. They are prodding not only government agencies, but also business and labor. They're trying to use the economic power of the poor to extract concessions. In Chicago, a biracial ministers group decided to organize boycotts, or rather selective buying campaigns, as they put it, against firms suspected of discrimination in hiring. The management of a cooperative food company called Country's Delight refused initially to show the clergyman its employment records. Operation Breadbasket called a meeting of militant leaders from all over the city and began that day what became the first of a series of picketing campaigns.
Certainly glad to see as many out today as are here. Now, some of you are kind of new to this picketing and demonstrating and attempting to get free, and you're looking kind of dead and kind of dull and dry. But if you want to get free, you got to be alive. Dead people don't want to get free. Matter of fact, they're indifferent to freedom. So if you really get live, you can intimidate the devil. Stand up and be counted and really express yourself. Now, we've got to talk just for a minute or two here about picket discipline. Now, it is important before you even start discussing picketing that you accept nonviolence, not only as a tactic, but ultimately as a style of life. For those of us that have some degree of experience in it, we would argue that nonviolence has the power to transform the hearts of evil men and certainly to shake up the powers and principalities that now enslave us. In the real sense, those of you who are students ought to have an extra kind of commitment to this, because it's certainly this day and time in 1966, by now you ought to become indignant over your lot in life. Many of our parents have been thrust upon the welfare rolls. Our fathers have been deprived of jobs. Many of us go to inferior schools. Our past is dark, and indeed our future is not much brighter. And in the real sense, we got a stake in this freedom movement. Somehow I have the feeling now that what we do in Chicago will determine how Negroes will live in urban America all across this country for the rest of this century. Now, when you hit that picket line and start threatening the powers and principalities, sometimes people are going to try to distract your attention by talking. Don't ever talk on a picket line. Each picket line will have a leader who's assigned to do the talking. If anyone spits on you, you got to have enough commitment to let your dignity be brighter than the spit.
The company quickly agreed to talk and proceeded to hire even more Negroes than the pickets had demanded. The new militants have used a wide variety of other tactics in a wide variety of causes, some good, some rather far out. The new groups have been criticized for misleading poor people, and the critics are not all conservatives. One of them, until his recent death, was Chicago Welfare Director Raymond Hilliard.
Here you have these artificial barriers of suspicion that is being fomented. Suspicion that takes the form of telling the poor they must mistrust the existing order, that white must hate black, and or that white hates black and that black must therefore hate white. All of these things, all of these divisive things, I think need to be exposed, and I think the role of the media of communication about which you asked a moment ago at this moment is to expose these phonies, these bogus leaders that parade as leaders of the poor and even in some cases as civil rights leaders. The principal cause of the poverty of the group that I call the new poor, as distinguished from the old poor, is lack of education, educational deficiency, or to make it as simple as possible, inability to read. There is no hope for the most numerous group among the poor people of America, not just of Chicago, until they learn to read. And anybody that would try to beguile them into believing that there is some other way out, a way by way of protest meetings or demonstrations or parades, all of which have their place and their validity, to focus attention on injustices. But anybody who would lead poor people to believe that there's any way out that can be a fun game or a picnic is doing a tragic disservice to the poor.
You're talking about these private organizations on the fringes of the...
I'm talking about some of the very lately come organizations that represent that they are the true representatives of the poor. I am talking about any organization that would discourage any poor person from getting an education. And if you want to be able to identify them, this is the best way. Anyone who will discourage a person from getting an education or from taking a job, that is a bogus organization and a bogus leadership.
Say that we must abolish the whole power structure, that we're against amelioration.
I don't believe we should. The power structure has many, many deficiencies, and I don't think there's anybody alive more aware of them than I am. And they need to be corrected, and they can be corrected, and one of the great glories of the war on poverty is that it seems to be on its way toward correcting them.
But the militant poor say the war on poverty has done little to shake the typical city power structure, which they consider complacent and hidebound. In Los Angeles and elsewhere, the militants are in perpetual battle against City Hall, with Sergeant Shriver as a distant and uncomfortable referee. The federal poverty bill called vaguely for maximum feasible participation of the poor. In theory, the recruitment of neighborhood people as employees of the program. In practice, the policy has enabled many poor militants to demand radical changes from the very establishments which pay their salaries. In Los Angeles, 400 poor people are employed in a community action program called the Neighborhood Adult Participation Project, or NAP. From the inception of the project, their leaders have been at loggerheads with NAP's parent group, the overall Los Angeles Poverty Board, known as the Economic and Youth Opportunities Agency. This spring, the NAP aides mutinied. The insurrection began as the aides arrived at a local church for what had been scheduled as a training session in community leadership. Mrs. Opal Jones had become director of the NAP project after a long career in private settlement houses. Like many another social worker recruited by the war on poverty, she quickly found herself caught up in controversy, ideological, political, and bureaucratic. This meeting was to have been an extension of a series of workshops on community relations. Mrs. Jones arranged it and invited guest participants without consulting her EYOA superiors. EYOA ordered her to cancel the meeting. On the appointed day, she allowed the aides to gather and only then informed them of the orders she had received.
We will be 1 year old in NAP on April 1st. And I almost said 100 years old on April 1st. If we could match it up as far as wisdom and understanding and knowledge and common sense, I would think that NAP is 100 years old, April 1st. Last Monday morning, we sat together and watched 5 films on the dynamics of leadership. We talked about the anatomy of a group, how a collection of people can move and become a group, how they bring into their group all of their own past experiences. We talked about what are the characteristics of a group, and we put this in our framework of our own outposts. This was why we had invited people to come and listen to the points of view that we had about the issues that were to be discussed. I was advised and ordered on Friday morning to not have this meeting this morning. And so this is why I've asked you all, because I wanted to be the one to interpret this to you. I wanted to be the one to explain the whole historical background for this and why we wanted to have a community relations conference. So, yes, Dorothy? Well, I would be guilty of insubordination. No, she asked me what would happen, and I said I would be guilty of insubordination. All the learning that we've had, we want to be able to hear each other. And remember those roadblocks to communication. So no matter how we feel now, this is where we match that knowledge and the feelings together. So let's all listen to each other and really do what we feel that we need to do, but let's keep our statesmanship about it.
I so move that we continue in some ways and means with our director to get this conference through. If not, we now go to EYOA where we can hold.
Ernest Priestley, an assistant to Mrs. Jones, took charge of the rebellious meeting.
Okay, folks, have your attention, please. I'm not going to recognize anyone else. Everyone sit down and let's talk about this peacefully. Sit down and listen to the other participants. I think the man who hasn't spoken.
I said, in case if our means and purpose are not heard or will not be listened to, there is always Washington, D.C. and Sergeant Shriver, because this is getting to be too much of a bureaucracy.
That's right.
And I think it's time that something should be done.
That's right. There we go. Preacher can walk.
The motion is that either we go back to our outposts and form some type of way we can have this conference, or we go to EYOA. Okay, have your attention, please. Now, we can be very emotional, but we should really know the consequences. If they fire one of us, what are we going to do? If they fire 2 or 3, now, so one is going to be thrown on the carpet. We know who's going to be on the carpet. We got to know what we're going to do. Now, one of the real big hang-ups is usually we're very emotional at one meeting. Then we don't follow up and to let them know how we're real concerned about what these problems are. This is why we have a unit.
I speak for White South Post. If the shipment represents us, anything it happens to us.
Good.
Right. Yeah.
Okay? Let's not talk anymore. I think we've talked enough. Let's appoint some monitors. Bill Abbott has walked before. Jefferson, be a monitor. Connors, Callaway, Mrs. Harris. Anyone else want to volunteer to monitor? Mrs. Lewis? Let people, women,
The 400 NAP aides set out in a protest march to EYOA's downtown headquarters, about 20 blocks away.
I have made arrangements for Mr. Gibb Trailer to talk to you, and he'll be glad to do this over at Pershing Square.
Well, we feel there'd be more to go upstairs because we want to wait for Mr. Maldonado until he either comes to the building or until he sends someone that can give us some official decisions on why we as a community action program can be involved in our own training
under our own framework without being dictated to by downtown.
AM 18 eventually, so wait for it.
The aides crowded into the EYOA boardroom and rather angrily awaited the man who had ordered the cancellation of their meeting. The man who was executive director of EYOA is Los Angeles poverty chief, Joseph Maldonado.
Keep it down. Keep it down. We have one more elevator. A table come up. Let's just hold it till they all get here. Mr. Shiflett will read the grievances that we have. Then the gentleman will be allowed to have conversations with us.
1. Since we have a director who initially was told she would have a great deal of freedom, why was a training session planned by NAP aides stopped in direct contradiction to the wishes of the director as well as the need of the aides? 2. We call for a federal investigation of the growing bureaucracy and the dictatorial nature it is taking.
Now that is the grievance. Mr. Maldonado and Mr. Nichols are both here. They will talk to the grievances in any other way which they want to express to this body. Then if you have questions, answers, or anything you want to contribute, I will arbitrarily call on you.
First, let me start by telling you that Mr. Priestley described... I want to start by telling you that in Mr. Priestley's description of what you are, he left out the fact that you're also an employee of the Economic and Youth Opportunities Agency, and I think you ought to recognize that. We are running a program that is best characterized by saying that we're in a fishbowl, and I don't regret this. I think people are entitled to know what we're doing. We explain as best we can, and we've certainly enlisted your support in the programs to tell people what we're doing. I am not in the least ashamed of anything that we're doing. I think that we're providing services to people. My estimate is that we're serving around 200,000 people in this community. And it seems to me that for starters, and I'm talking about a program that's been in operation 7 months, there's nothing to be apologetic about. Because I think the worst thing that we can do to this community is to present a face that shows a division. I believe that in the NAP program we have been working together, unitedly, and I hope that we continue that way.
We want everyone to have an opportunity to speak that want to, but it has to be in an orderly fashion.
The first speaker was Charles Knox, an aide to Congressman Augustus Hawkins, whose district includes Watts.
Let's begin by talking about the NAP program. Mr. Maldonado has said that the NAP program's major focus, and he said that the focus, even from the very beginning, was to try to provide a career training opportunity for poor people.
Wait a minute. You weren't listening very closely, sir. If you're going to quote me, please quote me correctly.
But then let me say this, in order to be correct. During the last board meeting, it was stated that the NAP program is going to become a manpower program. It was stated that the plans from the very beginning.
Sir, I must interrupt again. That was not what the board did, and if you want to examine the minutes of the board meeting, you can. Let's be clear about this.
I welcome a correction at the end of my comments. It's my understanding, and this is based not only on the last board meeting last Monday, it's my understanding as a result of having, through the months, talked to various persons, not only in the NAP program, but persons down here in this office. And I had a conversation with Mr. Maldonado three or 4 weeks ago, in which he explained to me that the NAP program major focus was going to be in providing job opportunities for poor people in the various public and private agencies. My position at that time, and this is the position of the congressman, is that if you place poor people in the bureaucratic institutionalized organizations, you offer disservice to the community. And let me explain to you what we mean by this. The major focus, the major objective of the community action legislation, as legislated by Congress, was to provide for the first time in the lives of poor people an opportunity for the poor people to involve other poor people in a self-help process. I think you have a right to be here today. You had a right to be where you were this morning. and the congressman feels this way, and he'll back you 100%, you have a right to question Mr. Maldonado and to question his program. But I know and you know that when people feel great sense of despair, when nobody will listen, when there's no hope, you're going to have the kind of things that happened last August and the kind of things that happened 2 weeks ago. It's up to you and it's up to me to do what we know has to be done to stop this sort of thing. This is the kind of thing that we're all embarrassed by, and we don't want to see it continue. We have got to work together to bring about the kind of changes that guarantee us the kind of security in our communities that we know will end in a result not like last August. That nightmare is behind us. Let's not let it happen again.
You're being told some things here that are also very, very regrettable. And that is that no matter who you work for, you can be irresponsible and do anything that you want to. That is not so. Anytime you're holding a job, there are certain rules and regulations that are set by boards of directors, and I don't care whether it's the EYOA or any other agency, and you're going to be expected to follow those directives. And I hope that you will follow the directives that come out of our board of directors.
As a result of the uncanceled meeting and of the protest march that followed, Maldonado dismissed Mrs. Jones as NAP director. Thus, two citizens, two officials of vaguely similar backgrounds and welfare work, were thrown into battle against one another. They were not natural or voluntary enemies, but in the heat of conflict, their roles were oversimplified. To Mrs. Jones's allies, those who spoke at the meeting, Maldonado was the symbol of the power structure, of City Hall, of Mayor Sam Yorty. Maldonado considered himself the servant of a board which simply represented the whole community, its mayor, its welfare and school departments, its business and labor groups, and its poor people. He may have viewed some of Mrs. Jones's friends with suspicion, suspecting that they would like to become a power structure. This particular fight was a sharp one, and it made headlines. But the same suspicions and distrust have divided other people and other communities, people of goodwill seeking the same ends. The implications of their arguments soar far above administrative discipline into political and social philosophy. We heard some of those arguments in separate interviews with Mrs. Jones and Maldonado.
Do these neighborhood people, these recipients, do they want a voice in the poverty programs?
I'm not sure you know about this idea that was advanced by someone here in the State Department of Social Welfare a few years ago. It's called the X factor. It is my belief now that this X factor is one of our biggest problems. This feeling of alienation, this feeling of not being a part. And it is my feeling that the people do want to be a part. They not only want to be a part to look in and to sit there, but they want to have a hand and a voice in saying what they'd like to have happen. The exciting thing to me is to see this new voice in these groups. They may not be as smooth as ours. They're not sanded down as much as some of us are. But they are clear. They're very loud and they're very clear. And the problem, I think, is the fact that people like me, who have been sanded down in the image of the great, whatever this is, have tended to be the spokesman for the neighborhood people. And the point I want to make is my best point that I feel in this whole movement is that we've got to learn when and how to get out of the way so people can speak for themselves.
Some of the militant leaders of the poor who've been demonstrating and marching and making speeches against your organization are in fact employees of the organization or its subordinate agencies. Is this a tolerable situation for you?
No, it isn't, and I think it's particularly intolerable when the employees of this organization engage in such activities, and we don't believe that when there's a job to be done that we're paying employees to do is getting done when they're marching or taking part in other activities. I think that one of my concerns is that we not put poor people in the position of being captives of political machines, or for that matter, of professional staff. And I, for one, am always willing and responsive to assist in the problems of people as one can listen to them very directly.
The power structure in a community may be afraid of the power of the people because, for the first, I think that they're afraid of the whole idea of people speaking in their own behalf. Because they're not used to this new voice in a neighborhood. So really, because people have been quiet so long, when people are active, when people do react, there's a great fear on the part of people who've been used to making the decisions all the time. The concern that I have is that the people in the community must recognize their power and use it in a positive way.
When the poor of a neighborhood begin to organize, especially with massive federal funds for their own purposes, for anti-poverty purposes, jobs, landlords, when they begin to fight what they call the power structure on economic matters, isn't it possible that they're eventually going to start fighting what they call the power structure in elections, politically? And isn't this naturally going to build up a considerable resistance on the part of elected officials?
I think so. I think that change comes hard, no matter what kind of change you're trying to institute. I think the real test is whether or not we're going to be able to identify those things that need to be changed in the institutional structure, and then after they're identified, go ahead and try to change them so that services are more meaningful and helpful to the people that they were meant for in the first place. However, it seems to me that to purely irritate and to, in a sense, condemn an entire institution is not the way to solve the problem. It seems to me that to say that all schools are no good and that what we need to do is to create new educational institutions outside the structure if we're going to solve the problem is a mistake, because in my judgment, the institutional structure that we have now for educational purposes is going to continue, and we can't afford to start all over and create a new system.
Isn't it almost unprecedented for leaders in any field to say to their followers, all right, you can move yourself now, we're going to get out of the way?
You don't have to say when you're going to move out of the way. You're referring to the statement I made a few minutes ago. You don't say. You say it with your actions, because if you lay the sufficient groundwork, if you've done a good job of training, if you have a good relationship, if your communication has been clear, that's the genius of the neighborhood people. You don't have to explain. They know when you're moving out of the way. I've moved out of the way a lot of times, and I certainly feel that the new look in the settlement movement, to me, will be more neighborhood people sharing more of these leadership roles. Until people like me can see this point of view and are not afraid of the people if they do disagree with us, that we don't feel uncomfortable when 10 or 15 come to see us at one time, that we'll realize then that we're coming through, that we've opened the door for people to participate for themselves. And you see, I think the greatest tribute to any neighborhood center in this country is when a group of people will say to them, no, I don't think this is the way we should do it.
Mrs. Jones' dismissal led to new protests. Civil rights groups called a rally and wanted to hold it at Wrigley Field, her headquarters. The city refused to let them use the big stadium, and in fact, the crowd that turned up hardly filled a parking lot. The militants always claim more followers than they have and predict larger crowds than they're able to turn out.
Would everyone please come to the front?
Those who did appear ran the gamut of the new spokesman for the poor. Social workers, politicians, civil rights leaders, poverty workers.
I'd like to have you just greet the audience, if you will, please. Those of you who were
wondering why Mrs. Jones didn't say anything. You know, times are very difficult now, and it seems that if you say things, that people misinterpret and you have all kinds of problems. So we're asking her to kind of remain silent for a while.
The first person who did speak was Mrs. Jones' associate and friend, Mrs. Mary Henry.
I'd like to share one or two things with you this afternoon that I have gotten out of a book called The War on Poverty, which is a community action program booklet from the Office of Economic Opportunity, which starts out by saying that the central problem today is to protect, now hear me now, the central problem today is to protect and restore man's satisfaction in belonging to a community where he can find security and significance. And this is why we're here today. This is what it's all about. That we're making efforts to establish a community where our people, and when I say our people, that means all of us, can find security and significance through community action. Now, community action isn't a new thing. It didn't just start last week when the eruption happened, but it started a long, long time ago. I was just listening this morning to some programs on television where community action has been going on such a long, long time that those of us who are just beginning to get involved in it need to know that what we're doing now is not particularly new, but it is unique because it's happening to NAP. NAP is trying to forge ahead now in the field of getting people involved and doing things for people and people doing things with people. And this is what community action is all about, and this is what it's got to be.
Congressman Huggins, supporting Mrs. Jones, had flown from Washington after her dismissal.
This is one of the few programs that is a grassroots program that comes close to arousing the people out of their lethargy and their indifference. It is a program that is designed to take the people at the neighborhood level to listen to their problems and to do something about those problems. These programs are opposed by the local public officials for various reasons. If individuals begin to think for themselves and to do something for themselves, they will begin to become involved in rent strikes, in political organization, in consumer education, in trying to do something to get jobs for themselves. Now, this is what the Congress intended. We do not intend that the poverty money is going to be spent as another relief program to provide just temporary relief for individuals. And I want to tell you now that unless this mess in Los Angeles is cleaned up, we will strike out Title II of the bill completely. And we're going to give it to federal agencies because we're tired of the local public officials knifing this program.
The national civil rights leadership was represented by Corps Director Floyd McKissick.
One of the things that you're going to have to be concerned with is the real watching of the poverty program, how it affects you, and really giving some stringent support to Miss Jones. I think she represents Negroes all over the United States. And what we want to say is that the Congress of Racial Equality stands behind Miss Jones to give her any support that she needs and to give this organization any support that you might need. So all you have to do is to really call upon us, and we'll be right here to help you. God bless you. Keep your strength up. Keep your will. But by all means, remember that you will have to take a part in the economic structure, in the political structure, and as consumers, we're all going to have to get organized in order to make the man really feel the sting of our power. I thank you.
On the day following that rally, Mrs. Jones and her friends attended and overwhelmed the regular monthly board meeting of the EYOA. It, too, became a mass protest against her dismissal by Director Maldonado. But he was not the only object of criticism. The militants had come to voice their pent-up dissatisfaction with the board itself and the city power structure which controlled it. The board members were to sit and hear themselves attacked for some 3 hours. They themselves were divided into 2 groups, readily identifiable by differences in dress, speech, and ideology. 7 of them were representatives of the poor community, selected by the poor in a special poverty program election. The balloting was unsuccessful because few people bothered to vote. On the other side of the room sat the 18 non-poor board members, officials of city and county agencies, including the school systems, and civic leaders. Mrs. Jones had as counsel the eminent lawyer A.L. Weirin of the American Civil Liberties Union.
She was entitled to a hearing, and if the board will give her a hearing. That's with respect to her discharge, and that's quite satisfactory. However, she is here also in the capacity of a Negro and of a leader and of a spokesman for a group of people who are very much concerned in the larger issue. And it seems to me that elemental fairness on your part would permit and would require that you listen to her briefly on the matters other than her discharge.
Let's analyze one other thing, sir, if I may. Is it fair to have a hearing at this particular time that Mrs. Jones is going to appeal to this board and start prejudging it before she is ready to present the hearing and a special meeting called for the hearing? Let Mrs. Jones speak for herself.
The point that I'd like to make, there are 2 separate issues, it seems to me. One is my own personal right, which Mr. Weirin is going to help protect. The second has to do with the project that I was directing, and it's my desire to keep these 2 issues in clear focus, because the concern I have is about the project that I was directing. The Neighborhood Adult Participation Project, which was a community action project, has been a very important project to all of us in this community. And the thing that has happened with the moving this project into a manpower arena and the stifling of the rights and privileges of those of us who are committed to real community development, this is a concern that I have as the director of this project, as the past director of this project. And the whole idea of the project has been the need for us to consider more flexible and non-traditional ways of operation. So the point that I'm trying to make is that I have a serious question as to whether or not a community action program can operate under the supervision and the direction of an organization like this composed of public institutions.
We're trying to be fair here, we will. May I just ask you and the board whether or not you could have a special hearing tomorrow or the day thereafter or something real soon?
That will come up at a later time, please. Now will you let the board take care of a couple of items that we have a motion before the House?
But the board did not get to its other items of business. Instead, the meeting became, in effect, a preliminary hearing on Mrs. Jones' dismissal in particular and the grievances of the militant poor groups in general.
I have the floor at this time, please. Thank you. Okay, fine. Now, what I want to ask you is who made the motion to present this poll to the board? Who made the motion? Who made the motion?
I don't know who made the motion.
I said, first of all, the meeting was not taking notion. It was just an opinion. And the opinion was unanimous. 17 people voted for it. Now, if the rest of them that are here want to lie out of it, they can lie out. I don't have to be quiet for you, Roma. Don't tell me to be quiet because I'll never be quiet. You'll never shut me up. We never have.
To Mr. Mason, there was a poll taken. Unanimous there.
Unanimous, right.
But pending what? Pending certain circumstances.
Certain right.
Certain things that are supposedly to be brought up at this meeting today.
No.
Oh, yes, sir, today. You
This discussion was going on. Mr. Gold stated that all that was being asked, that to clarify among the board members that Mr. Maldonado had the authority to fire Mrs. Jones or anyone else that was guilty of insubordination or misconduct, whatever they was called. We did not, and I don't want to call anyone a liar because I don't like to be called a liar. But as far as I remember, we did not vote unanimously on anything. We just said, Mr. Go asked that there was only a consensus of the board that Mr. Maldonado had this right. And he had the right. So we all agreed that he had this right to fire anyone. But as far as I know, this is all we took.
Most of us were not at your executive committee meeting, and we don't know what happened. Apparently, there is some difference of opinion as to what happened. And I don't want to go into it because I don't know. But on April 1st of this year, Mr. Maldonado made a statement to the Los Angeles Times in which he said that he did not recommend Mrs. Jones' dismissal. Nonetheless, on the day before, on March 31, Mr. Maldonado dictated a letter to Mrs. Jones saying she was dismissed. Now, there obviously is some serious misunderstanding somewhere. You would say all along you don't. Let's have a hearing now. We're prepared to go ahead. The matter is of public interest. It's of concern to Mrs. Jones. It's of concern to you. Let's have the hearing and get it over with, one way or the other. And let's have it in the open for a change.
I don't think it's up to me to make this decision. I think it's up to the board as a whole to make this decision. We're trying to be fair here. We will.
The first speaker was Mrs. Mary Henry, who's a member of the National Advisory Council of Community Representatives set up by Schreiber.
I represent Mr. Maldonado, Mrs. Cook, Mr. Nigg, anybody here, as much as I represent any NAP aide. And I am disenchanted, to say the least. The people whom I took upon myself to feel very good about representing have found it necessary to deal very dishonestly with the people in Los Angeles. I have been working in community action for a long time before the poverty program came to Los Angeles. I have been a group worker, a community worker for many years, and if I am an expert in any field, it is in the field of planning conferences and meetings and workshops for, quote, grassroots level people. If the manner in which you carry out your board meetings, if the wording for the actions that you take in your board meetings is beyond the comprehension of the people who were elected by the people to sit here, then an investigation needs to take place immediately.
I'm Doris Joyce Fuller. I'm with BPA Mothers and the Imperial Coast Improvement Committee, and my God, how many others that you said we had to form. We have followed your orders down the line. We have formed groups on top of groups on top of groups. Then you'll send professionals in the area with your criteria from downtown, say, we will tell you what to do. We take months of patient work, working with these people, trying to train them what is our problems in the community. Once they find out our problems, Knapp isn't the only one been under fire. I've seen a many professional that has worked with us fired. When we once began to farm and work things out to our complete satisfaction, work things out to our care and our concern. When I first met you people, I met you people because of one simple reason. I was looking for a job. I wanted independence. I didn't ask that much for that job, but everybody yelled volunteer. See, I don't work for Knapp. That's the reason I can approve of Knapp so great. I'm just a citizen without a job that have put my little pennies, nickels, and dimes into this thing, have paid babysitters, have gone hungry, walking, trying to make appointments and meetings and things on time that you ride around in your fine cars making. Now, I watched over here. Now, I made this statement, this would happen. I seen amendments passed this afternoon. These people didn't vote, they're still reading to see what the amendments were. These people holding their hands up. I haven't even heard them from out here. Do they know what they are? This is what you call, you put the power structure, it is so neatly done. They're not even mixed up. One is put on one side, the other one's put on the other. And I'm hoping to God and praying that I have been with one group as another. I don't stand it as a leader. I was BPA mothers one time. I belonged to 32 different anti-poverty groups. Now, if I don't call that following EYO's criteria, farming, steady organizations, I don't know what criteria is.
Mr. Maldonado, we're poor because we have been denied the opportunity. And these are the people who denied us this opportunity. Now, if the EYOA is going to do a job, it will have to do something pretty fast. It will have to allow community action programs. It will have to allow for NAP to exist, because all we're getting are the same kinds of things that you have been handling for many years. BPA's budget is far larger than EYOA's, and what are they doing? What is the Board of Education doing? Is it educating our children? We wouldn't need a war on poverty if you who are denied, who voted against her, actually did your jobs. Thank you.
For a long time, the things that are in my heart to say to people like you, I've been waiting, not really wanting to, but knowing one day I would have to say it. And with us right now, we've been left out, put out, and now when we struggle back to be and to try to be, we have to continue to fight our way again. With Miss Opal Jones right now, a woman, a real woman, the kind of woman that we would all like to be proud to know. At a time of truth, when she strives to be herself and do what is right, just, and good for people, she stopped. Now, I don't think that this is just because of, say, insubordination. I want to know, what did she do? What did she do to make her be dismissed in the first place? Was it because she was going to really bring people up? And was it because the power structure itself is afraid to give these poor people power? Is it true, really, that this board is controlled by another board, like the mayor's board, and that his mayor, you're using all of you all for little whooping boys? And the only reason why the truth doesn't come out here now is because you got so used of living off of them little fat checks that you sold your own human dignity down the drain, and you keep on filling out ways to try to sell my human dignity down the drain. And you say you are the way. And what is going wrong is you're scared to tell the truth. You're scared to tell the truth. I don't know why. You might be scared of living in a neighborhood like that. And so you lie to keep on staying where you live. You go home and you lock your doors. You lock them up tight in, split-level houses with split-level minds. And what you keep on doing is that you want to make my people be the same way. And if you're going to sit there, if you're going to say you are for the poor, then B, you got a choice. If you're not going to be, get up.
The Los Angeles Poverty Board is still there, and that young man is probably still angry. But the immediate occasion for his protest is gone. Mrs. Opal Jones is back in office as NAP director. And by order of Washington, her project has been removed from the day-to-day operational control of the Los Angeles Board. It's been given a considerable measure of autonomy. This is what the militants are demanding across the country. That their programs be funded more or less directly and independently of the city power structures. But often the battle itself does damage. In Los Angeles, each side continues to suspect the other of plots and intrigues. The result has been virtual paralysis throughout much of the poverty program. Thus, the ferment sometimes becomes a force in itself, independent of its origins. It extends across the country, it transcends the poverty program and the civil rights movement. The new militants have won some local battles. When they've kept their sights realistic, when they've sincerely tried to solve problems and not exacerbate them, they've often succeeded. They've established community centers, pressured school boards into repairing buildings, secured reductions in water rates, forced merchants to redress injustices in pricing and hiring. Thus constructively channeled, the ferment can grow, and in time perhaps make a significant dent in the problem of poverty. When the militants are less honorably motivated, when they preach revolution instead of evolution, they're less likely to succeed and more likely to do damage. Whenever they persuade a poor person that he need not seek an education or a job, but merely organize and inherit the earth, they mislead that person. Whenever they inculcate unproductive impatience, whenever they persuade a poor person that half a loaf is worse than no loaf, they damage the cause they purport to serve, be it civil rights, the war on poverty, or what have you. But one thing is certain, for better or for worse, the ferment is there. Good evening.
Everybody clap.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.